Okay, so this week is a very short week, so we're going to be using a shorter subject for this week. We are going to be talking about motion design. Motion design is actually part of working with web, mobile, and animation as well as interaction. So we are going to concentrate this week on motion, and then next week we'll look at web, interactive, and mobile. When I say motion design, what does that bring up to you? Motion design for graphic design is going to encompass doing things like building commercials, putting together animations. It also is going to encompass creating the titling for television programs and movie titles and the credits that show at the end and things of that nature as well. We follow a few different rules on motion design because not only do you need to consider what you're seeing on the screen at any given second, but we have to plan ahead for what the action is going to be, and we also need to be concerned with the typography that we're going to use so that it can be read. And the picking of typefaces for screen is going to differ from picking it for print. So we will cover some of that next week. We're going to concentrate today on motion design. Story, movement, action, and sound all play a significant role in animations, motion design, films, and television, or online commercials across devices, whether they're created for a small mobile screen or a huge public screen or any size in between. Sound and movement help with storytelling. Most commercials and web films are live action. These are people and products filmed or videotaped. In animation or in motion design, you simulate movement. You can more easily show rather than tell, whether that means telling a story through action or making complicated accounts or demonstrations comprehensible through movement. In graphic design and advertising, we use different types of simulated movement for specific purposes. You can animate letter forms, characters, or objects, or shapes and forms. Animated works can stand alone as films online or as TV or web commercials. Or you can conceive a live-action film or a commercial that incorporates animated pieces like characters, or motion design like banners, moving graphics, animated logos, opening film graphics, montages, branded motion graphics, or hybrid forms of motion. You could think of motion design as the broader category of simulated movement with animation as a specific type of motion, one that focuses more on storytelling. In advertising, simulated movement can tell stories, promote, demonstrate, or give information. The design concept drives all your design decisions: how the story unfolds, the scenes, the pace, the rhythm, the color palette, the voice, the types of sounds. In time-based media, you create a series of events with relationships to one another, temporal relationships, visual and story events that happen over a specific amount of time. For example, a character throws an object that bounces and then breaks. The throw, the bounce, and the ultimate break are all related visually and temporally as a chain of events. A series of events needs a chronology, the order of events. A time-based design is composed of a number of media items. There's events, frames, images, and sound, each of which has its own duration. A frame is one single static image. It's one of many composed together to create motion design. You combine these into an entire piece by specifying the temporal relationships among the different items. When creating motion or animation solutions, there are three main phases: pre-production, which is the planning and storyboarding; production, which is the creation or the actual making of the motion piece; and then post-production, which includes editing, adding soundtracks, and making corrections. Use a storyboard as a planning device before a piece is produced. The storyboard functions as a sequential outline of your story in keyframes in a specific sequence showing how the story plays out. The storyboard acts as a visual reference to guide you and your team during planning and during production. You break down the film or animation or whatever into a few significant frames to help you determine which actions are important, what each looks like, and the time constraints in total. Not only does a storyboard help you figure out what you want to show, but it helps the director by providing a visual reference for filming or animation and to understand what the goal is. When you work in motion or in film or in video, you have to consider the following broad factors when integrating motion into your storytelling. What is the purpose of your story? The motion, animation serves the storytelling and propels it. What's the purpose of the story's motion? Write that out in 1 or 2 sentences. Pre-production, work out the story structure and map out the motion. Here's your storyboard. How will the journey look? How about the style of visualization? Figure out the ending first because that gives you direction. Move the drama or story forward. Keep the audience's attention at all time. Contrast, texture, pattern, changes in scale, visual surprises will help. Apply the major design principles to the motion graphics. It has to have balance. There needs to be a visual hierarchy. There needs to be unity and especially rhythm. Use your storyboard to plan the rhythm of the journey. Consider incorporating a dominant color into your color palette. Use sound to help move the story along as well as for emphasis and for expression. So if you have a piece and then turn the sound off, does the story work just as well? Edit and revise for fluidity and brevity. Streamline. What can you delete and still have the meaning conveyed? Determine if the story works for the media channel and whether it's linear or non-linear. So is it something that the audience is actually going to engage with, or is this simply something they're going to sit back and watch? So to do this, you start with an idea based on an insight. Write your idea down in 1 sentence or craft a pitch, which is a concise verbal or visual presentation of your idea for the commercial, animation, or film, or whatever it is. Explain it clearly. Planning during pre-production, which is before you go to software or before you shoot the video, is critical to working out your story and how it's going to look and move and sound. Create your storyboard with at least 4 to 6 frames for a visual reference guide. An ad should drive the visual style and music choices. The visual style will play a large part in creating a believable world for your animation or your film. Is it something familiar, a familiar place, maybe with a twist? A fresh new world we've never seen before? Research animation and motion graphic styles or techniques as a tradition, like hand-drawn animation, then computer animation, live action animation, stop motion animation, flipbook animation. Look at all these different kinds and see how they work. Experiment with contrasting visual elements. Consider using visual contrasting size contrast to produce visual emphasis. Establish focal points to make sure the audience is directed to see and understand exactly what you want. Craft the animated or film world to make it believable and as an entity unto itself. Determine all the guidelines for colors, forms, textures, and characters specific to this built world. Give credence and new life to old rules of animation. Walt Disney Studios has a codified principle of animation related to the basic laws of physics, and it was published in Illusion of Life. And these are those principles. First, there's squash and stretch. Changing or distorting the shape or form of an object or character during an action. Then there's timing, which is the speed of the action. Anticipation, which is the preparation for an action. Staging is presenting the scene to direct the viewer's attention towards that important action. Follow through and overlapping action. The termination of an action and establishing its relationship to the next action. Straight ahead action and pose to pose action. Those are 2 different approaches to the creation of the movement for the animation. slow in and out. To create a continuity of motion, this refers to the spacing of the in-between frames between extreme poses. Arcs. Arcs are the visual path of action to denote natural movement. Exaggeration is design and use of action to amplify the idea's essence. Secondary action is an object or character's action that's a direct result of the first action. And then there's appeal, which is creating a design or an action with visual interest. Well, we'll go back. Time-based media allows you to show change or growth, shrinkage, transformation, metamorphosis, alteration. Use scale to show contrast in size and spatial or emotional relationships. Can you use object relationships to conceal or reveal? The conceptual interplay between spoken words or typography and the images and sound in an animation, film, or motion piece should be synergistic, communicating more than either alone. Consider starting with music, and use the music to parallel the idea in rhythm and tone. Music or sound will lay a foundation for the rhythm and the pace, and it will help you create visual beats. Start with the end, which is the last frame, and then determine the first frame. Then conceive and sketch the middle frames, and finally, what is the climax? In a few sentences or on a storyboard, try telling the entire story backward. Starting with the end will help you know where the journey takes the viewer and what's in it for the audience. As in all graphic design, one must consider spatial relationships, the distance between the thing seen in relation to the viewer, how far or how close it is, and the shifts between near and far. Images can be seen from a close-up, that is, zoomed-in shot, a medium shot, seen from a medium distance, or a long shot, which is seen from far away. How a designer interposes different types of shots, each frame forming spatial relationships to the other, creates rhythm and contrast. Rhythmic relationships in screen-based media can also be created by the duration of each shot, and the same way one does in print by the interaction of images with contrast and variation. These are some fundamentals to keep in mind when designing animation and motion graphics. Tell a visual story based on a single well-defined design concept. Use color for unity, for punch and drama and focal points. Changes in scale can create the illusion of spatial depth as well as the feeling of near and far. Contrast creates visual interest in hierarchies. Avoid flatness. Sound can help tell a story, create drama, create mood, and punctuate. Create visual beats. Keep viewers' visual journey in mind. We'll talk more about this next week, and this week there is only one quiz to complete. Do remember your previous assignments.